The Arizona sun hit the tarmac at Falcon Mesa like a hammer on an anvil, sending waves of heat dancing off the concrete. Even at 0900, the air shimmered with that bone-dry intensity that made steel too hot to touch and turned every breath into something you had to work for. It was the kind of morning where shadows felt precious and smart people stayed indoors. Captain Ava Morgan wasn't most people. She walked through the chain-link gate with the quiet stride of someone who belonged nowhere and everywhere at once. No uniform, no rank visible, just desert boots that had seen real desert and cargo pants that fit like they'd been lived in. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, revealing a tan line where aviators usually Saturday. Everything about her was understated, except for the way she moved, deliberate, economical, like someone who'd learned that wasted motion could get you killed. The gate guard barely glanced up from his clipboard, just waved her through with the bored efficiency of a man counting hours until lunch. She nodded once and kept walking, her small duffel bag slung over one shoulder, paperwork folded neat in her back pocket. Inside the operations tent, the air conditioning fought a losing battle against the desert heat. 2 flight instructors lounged in folding chairs. One, Lieutenant Myers, wore aviators indoors like it was still 1986. The other, Lieutenant Hensley, clutched a protein shake like it was liquid confidence. They were laughing about something on a tablet screen, probably a video of some cadet washing out spectacularly. "Help you?" The aviator guy looked up, his tone carrying that particular brand of boredom that said he'd already decided she didn't belong here. Ava stopped in front of their makeshift desk. "Captain Ava Morgan. I have a civilian access pass for Apache simulator time today." She pulled out the paperwork, unfolded it once, and placed it flat on the table. "Slots booked for 0930. Protein shake guy looked her over like she was a curiosity at a county fair. "You want to what now?" "Fly the Apache simulator," she repeated, voice level as a carpenter's square. The 2 men exchanged glances. Aviator guy picked up her paperwork, scanned it with the theatrical attention of someone reading a restaurant menu, then dropped it back on the table like it was contaminated. "Yeah, see, here's the thing, sweetheart," he drawled. "We're running crew evaluations today. Birds not available for tourists." "The authorization is signed by your base director," Ava said quietly. "Don't care if it's signed by the Pope," Protein Shake Guy chimed in. "Apache is not a carnival ride. Those birds eat people who don't know what they're doing." Ava didn't argue, didn't raise her voice, didn't even flinch. She just picked up her paperwork, folded it once, and stepped back toward a metal chair positioned near the tent's edge, where she could see the flight line. "You can wait all you want," Aviator Guy called after her. "Answer's still going to be no." She sat down, placed her bag at her feet, and folded her hands in her lap. From where she sat, she could see the Apache simulator hangar shimmering in the distance, heat waves making it dance like a mirage. The 2 instructors went back to their tablet, shaking their heads and chuckling. "Some people watch Top Gun once and think they're Maverick," one muttered. Ava closed her eyes and let the sound wash over her. Distant rotor thumps from the practice birds, the hiss of hydraulics, the metallic ping of cooling metal. Sounds that had been the soundtrack to half her adult life, sounds that still lived in her dreams, both the good ones and the ones that woke her up sweating. She'd been up since 0500, sitting on the edge of a motel bed that smelled like industrial disinfectant and old cigarettes. The kind of place that rented rooms by the week and didn't ask questions. Her gear bag sat open on the single chair, contents organized with military precision. Clean clothes folded tight, toiletries in a clear bag, and at the bottom, wrapped in a faded bandana, a photograph she hadn't looked at in 3 months. She'd pulled it out that morning, held it to the weak light filtering through dusty Venetian blinds. 3 figures on a helipad somewhere in the sand, dust devils swirling in the background. Her in the middle, flight helmet tucked under her arm, flanked by her crew chief and her co-pilot, all of them squinting against the sun, all of them young enough to think they were invincible. The crew chief had made it home, got out, started a family in Ohio, coached Little League now according to his Christmas cards. The co-pilot never made it past the 3rd deployment. An IED took his bird down in a valley whose name she still couldn't say out loud. His son was graduating flight school next month, had his dad's eyes and his dad's stubborn streak, and absolutely no idea that Captain Ava Morgan existed. She'd promised herself she'd take one last flight before his graduation, not for glory, not for closure, just to prove to herself that she could still touch the sky without falling apart. She folded the photo back into the bandana and zipped her bag. Time to go keep a promise. Now, sitting in the shade of the operations tent, Ava could feel sweat beading at the base of her neck where her hair was pulled back. The tattoo there was small, angular, black ink that had faded to charcoal over the years. Most people never saw it. Most people didn't need to. The minutes ticked by, the instructor's conversation drifted from her to weekend plans, to complaints about the coffee. Every so often, one of them would glance her way and shake his head like she was a problem that would eventually solve itself. A young mechanic walked past, tool bag slung over her shoulder, grease under her fingernails. She looked at Ava with curious eyes, taking in the stillness, the patience, the way someone could sit in the heat without fidgeting or checking a phone every 30 seconds. The mechanic said, slowing down, "You okay out here?" Ava opened her eyes. "Just waiting." The girl nodded and kept walking, but she looked back twice before disappearing into the hangar. Something about the way Ava sat there, perfectly still in the furnace heat, made her think of her grandfather. Old Marines had that same quality. They could wait forever if they had to. Inside the briefing room, the morning's flight instructors were getting their second wind after the initial wave of simulator runs. The air conditioning hummed overhead, fighting the desert heat that pressed against every window and door. Folding chairs were arranged in loose rows facing a whiteboard covered in call signs, flight times, and weather updates that hadn't changed in hours. The same two who'd turned Ava away were holding court near the coffee station, regaling anyone who'd listened with their tale of the wannabe pilot still sitting outside. "I'm telling you, she's been out there for 2 hours, protein shake guy was saying, gesturing with his hands like he was describing a fish that got away, just sitting there staring at the hangar like she's trying to will herself into the cockpit. A cluster of cadets laughed. These were the new ones, fresh from basic flight training, still young enough to think everything was either hilarious or terrifying, with no middle ground. "What's her deal?" asked one, a kid with a Texas drawl and enough confidence for 3 people. "Says she wants to fly the Apache sim," aviator guy replied, shaking his head. "Got some paperwork says she's qualified, but come on, look at her. Civilian clothes, no patches, no presents. Probably flew drones from some air-conditioned trailer in Nevada and thinks that counts as combat experience." More laughter, the kind that comes easy when you're 22 and convinced you know everything. "Did you see her hands, though?" The female mechanic from earlier had walked in, wrench still in her grip. "They're scarred up pretty good. Don't get hands like that from video games." "Probably worked construction," someone suggested, "or maybe she fixes motorcycles." "Yeah, well, fixing motorcycles doesn't make you qualified to fly a $40 million weapons platform," aviator guy declared with the authority of someone who'd been doing this job for all of 6 months. Nobody noticed the man who'd entered through the back door of the briefing room. He moved with the kind of quiet authority that didn't need to announce itself, the way senior officers learned to walk after enough years of being the person everyone looked to when things went sideways. Air Marshal Robert Keane was 57 years old and had been flying military aircraft since before some of these instructors were born. He'd commanded squadrons in 3 different conflicts, flown everything from Hueys to Blackhawks to birds that didn't officially exist. His uniform was pressed but not pristine, worn enough to show it got used. His face carried the weathered look of someone who'd spent serious time in serious places. He'd come to Falcon Mesa for a routine inspection, the kind of dog and pony show that kept the bureaucrats happy and the funding flowing. But what he was hearing in this briefing room wasn't routine at all. "I'm just saying," one of the cadets was pontificating, "if you want to play pilot, get Microsoft Flight Simulator. Don't waste our time with fantasy camp." Keane stopped walking, turned toward the voices, listened. "She's probably some rich lady going through a midlife crisis," another added, "wants to tell her book club she flew an Apache. Or maybe she's writing a blog," protein shake guy suggested. "Military wife tries combat flying, clicks for days." The laughter that followed had an edge to it now, the kind that turned from amusement to meanness without anyone noticing the transition. Keane had heard enough. He turned and walked back outside, leaving the briefing room to its jokes and assumptions. He had a feeling those jokes were about to age very poorly. The heat hit him like walking into an oven. Even after all these years in desert postings, the Arizona sun still took your breath away. He pulled his cap down low and started walking toward the operations tent, his boots crunching on the gravel path that connected the buildings. That's when he saw her. She was exactly where the instructors had said she'd be, sitting in a metal chair at the edge of the tent's shade. But seeing her in person, Keen understood immediately why the kids inside had gotten it so wrong. They were looking at her clothes, her lack of visible rank, her civilian status. They weren't looking at her. She sat with perfect stillness, back straight but not rigid, hands folded but ready to move. Her breathing was controlled, economical. She wasn't wilting in the heat or checking her phone or showing any sign of the restless energy that defined most people her age. She was a study in controlled patience, the kind you learned in places where moving at the wrong time could get you killed. Keen had seen that stillness before, in snipers waiting for their shot, in pilots preparing for night insertions behind enemy lines, in soldiers who'd learned that survival sometimes meant being able to disappear into yourself until the moment demanded action. As he got closer, she turned her head slightly, acknowledging his approach without breaking her composure. That's when he saw it. Behind her left ear, where her pulled-back hair revealed the line of her neck, was a tattoo. Small, precise, done in black ink that had faded to charcoal with age. It wasn't decorative, wasn't artistic. It was functional, a mark of identification for people who couldn't carry ID cards into certain places. Keen's breath caught in his throat. The design was simple but unmistakable. 2 crossed rotors beneath a stylized dagger. The whole thing no bigger than a quarter. Below it, in numbers so small they were almost invisible, 160. 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. The Night Stalkers. But that wasn't what made Keen's blood run cold. It was the additional mark below the numbers. A tiny arrow pointing downward, crossed by a single horizontal line. Tier 1 Direct Action. Keen had seen that mark exactly 3 times in his career. Twice on posthumous award recommendations that he'd signed himself, once in a classified briefing about operations that officially never happened. The woman sitting in front of him wasn't some civilian playing dress-up. She was a ghost from the deepest shadows of military aviation, the kind of pilot whose missions were redacted from official records and whose existence was denied by 3 different government agencies. He said quietly. Ava looked up at him with green eyes that held depths he couldn't read. Sir. I couldn't help but notice your ink, he kept his voice low, conversational. That's some very specific artwork. She didn't flinch, didn't try to cover it up, didn't deflect with humor or false modesty. It is. Mind if I ask where you got it? Ava studied his face for a long moment, reading things in his posture and bearing that the young instructors had completely missed. Then she spoke 2 words that confirmed everything Keen suspected and feared. Hindu Kush. The Hindu Kush Mountains, Afghanistan, where Task Force 160 had run operations so classified they didn't appear in any official record, where pilots flew missions that couldn't be acknowledged and completed objectives that couldn't be celebrated. Keen felt something shift in his chest, a combination of respect, recognition, and the sudden understanding that he was looking at a legend he'd assumed was dead. What's your call sign? He asked. Ghost Actual. The name hit him like a physical blow. Ghost Actual, the pilot who'd flown the impossible insertion at Objective Red Sand, who'd extracted the team from the valley that satellite imagery said couldn't be reached by aircraft, who'd disappeared from all records after a mission that was too successful to acknowledge. Standing in front of him, sweating quietly in the Arizona heat, was the woman who'd single-handedly redefined what was possible in rotary wing aviation. And his instructors had been laughing at her for 2 hours. Keen looked back toward the operations tent where her paperwork had been dismissed, then toward the briefing room where the jokes were probably still flying. His jaw tightened. He said, his voice carrying the authority of 30 years in uniform. You'll fly today. He turned and walked back toward the briefing room, his stride sharp and purposeful. Behind him, Ava remained seated, but something in her posture had changed. The waiting was over. Inside the briefing room, the laughter died the moment Keen walked through the door. His expression was dark enough to change the weather, and everyone in the room suddenly found their phones or their notebooks very interesting. Which one of you turned away the woman outside? His voice carried the kind of quiet authority that made people's spines straighten involuntarily. Aviator Guy raised his hand like a student confessing to cheating. That was me, sir, but she's not on the flight manifest and we're running evaluations today. Did you look at her paperwork? Yes, sir, but did you look at her? The instructor's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Sir, the woman sitting outside has more flight time in Apache aircraft than everyone in this room combined. Keen's voice was deadly quiet. She's flown missions that don't exist in places you can't pronounce for reasons you don't have clearance to know. The room had gone completely silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to have stopped humming. But more importantly, Keen continued, she has something most of you will never earn, the right to be here. He turned to the flight operations chief, a master sergeant who'd been watching the show with growing alarm. Get the simulator prepped. Full weapon systems, full navigation, full electronic warfare suite. No training wheels. Sir, the insurance waiver for civilian access. She's not a civilian. Keen's eyes swept the room. Captain Morgan is retired military. Her clearance level is higher than mine. Protein Shake Guy found his voice. Captain Morgan. But she said exactly what she needed to say. Keen's stare could have cut glass. You assumed the rest. He walked to the door, then paused and looked back. Oh, and gentlemen, the next time a Night Stalker asks to fly your aircraft, the correct response is, yes, right away, Are we clear? A chorus of yes, sir, followed him out the door. Behind him, the briefing room erupted in whispered conversations and frantic Google searches. Night Stalkers, Ghost Actual, Hindu Kush operations. The pieces were starting to come together, and nobody was laughing anymore. Outside, Keen walked directly to where Ava was still sitting. She looked up as he approached, and he saw something different in her eyes now, not anticipation exactly, but a subtle shift from patience to readiness. Simulator's yours, he said simply. Full capabilities unlocked. Ava stood, shouldered her bag, and nodded once. Thank you, Marshal. As they walked toward the hangar, Keen found himself matching her pace. There was something humbling about walking beside someone whose reputation existed only in whispered conversations and redacted files, someone who'd flown into the impossible and brought everyone home. Can I ask you something, Captain? Keen began, then corrected himself. Ava. Why here? Why now? You could get sim time at any number of facilities, with better equipment and less hassle. She was quiet for so long he thought she wasn't going to answer. Then, made a promise to someone who can't keep it himself anymore. Keen nodded, understanding completely. In their line of work, the ghosts accumulated. You carried them with you wherever you went, and sometimes keeping faith with the dead was the only thing that kept you sane. They reached the simulator hangar, and Keen pulled open the heavy door. Cool air rushed out, a blessed relief from the furnace outside. Inside, the Apache flight simulator gleamed under fluorescent lights, its cockpit identical in every detail to the real thing. A small crowd had already gathered. Word traveled fast on a military base, especially word about legends walking among them. The female mechanic from earlier stood near the control booth, her eyes wide with something approaching awe. A handful of cadets had found excuses to be in the area, their earlier jokes forgotten in the face of dawning realization. Ava walked directly to the simulator without acknowledging the audience. She did a quick visual inspection of the cockpit, checking systems with the automatic efficiency of someone who'd done this thousands of times before. Her movements were economical, professional, with no wasted motion. She climbed into the pilot seat and began the startup sequence. Her hands moved across the controls with muscle memory precision, flipping switches and adjusting settings without conscious thought. The simulator screens came alive, displaying the familiar landscape of a training scenario. But Keen noticed something the others didn't. The scenario loading on the screens wasn't one of the standard training programs. Somehow, the system had defaulted to a specific mission profile, Objective Red Sand. The same operation that had made Ghost Actual a legend and cost her co-pilot his life. Ava saw it too. Her hands paused for just a moment over the controls, and Keen saw something flicker across her face. Pain, memory, the weight of carrying ghosts. Then her training took over. She initialized the mission parameters and began her approach. What happened next was like watching poetry written in rotor wash and hydraulic fluid. The simulated Apache lifted off with the smooth grace of a bird that had never doubted its ability to fly. Ava's control inputs were so subtle they were almost invisible. Tiny adjustments that kept the aircraft in perfect trim as she navigated through the virtual mountains of Afghanistan. On the screen surrounding the simulator, the audience watched in stunned silence as she flew a profile that most of them had only heard described in hushed tones. Nap of the Earth flight through terrain that satellite imagery said was impassable, insertion into a landing zone that existed only in the space between two cliff faces, with margins for error measured in inches rather than feet. She made it look effortless. The mission scenario threw everything at her: mechanical failures, weather, enemy fire, communications jamming. She handled each challenge with the calm competence of someone who'd faced them all before in places where simulation meant the difference between coming home and being listed as missing in action. When the scenario ended, the screens faded to black, and the simulator powered down. Ava removed her helmet and climbed out of the cockpit with the same quiet efficiency she'd shown climbing in. The hangar was completely silent. Then someone started clapping, slowly at first, then with growing enthusiasm as others joined in. It wasn't the kind of applause you'd give to a good performance. It was the recognition due to someone who'd just demonstrated mastery of something most people couldn't even attempt. Ava didn't acknowledge the applause. She simply picked up her bag and walked toward the door, her obligation fulfilled, her promise kept. Marshal Keen intercepted her at the exit. For a moment, they stood facing each other, two professionals who understood the weight of service and sacrifice. "It was an honor," he said simply. Ava nodded once, then walked out into the Arizona heat. Behind her, the crowd slowly dispersed, but the conversations would continue for hours, years maybe. The female mechanic approached Keen as he watched Ava disappear across the tarmac. "Sir, was she really?" "She was," Keen confirmed. "The best of the best. The kind they don't make anymore." "Why did she leave?" Keen was quiet for a long moment, watching the heat waves dance off the concrete. "Because sometimes the mission ends, but the war doesn't. And sometimes the only way to honor the dead is to keep living." The mechanic nodded like she understood, though Keen suspected she was years away from really comprehending what he meant. That was okay. Understanding came with time and experience, and losses that accumulated like scar tissue around your heart. As Ava's figure disappeared into the distance, Keen found himself thinking about ghosts, the ones she carried, the ones he carried, the ones that kept them all honest and grounded and committed to something larger than themselves. In the end, that's what separated the real warriors from the pretenders. Not the uniform or the rank or the number of hours logged in the cockpit. It was the willingness to carry the weight of responsibility even after the mission was over. Especially after the mission was over. The desert sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains when the word finally spread through the entire base. By 1600 hours, every pilot, every crew chief, every cadet who'd been within 50 miles of Falcon Mesa had heard some version of the story. The woman they dismissed as a wannabe was Ghost Actual, the pilot who'd flown the impossible mission, the legend who disappeared into classified history and emerged years later as a quiet civilian asking politely for simulator time. In the Chow Hall, conversations stopped when she walked in, not because people were staring, but because they suddenly understood they were in the presence of someone whose service couldn't be quantified in normal terms, someone who'd operated in the spaces between official recognition and necessary action. Ava bought a bottle of water and a sandwich, ate in silence at a corner table, and left without fanfare, the same way she did everything. Later, as the sun painted the mountains purple and gold, she stood in the parking lot beside a dusty pickup truck that had seen better decades. Her bag was slung over one shoulder, her promise fulfilled. The young mechanic approached hesitantly, as if unsure whether she had the right to speak to someone whose exploits existed only in whispered stories and redacted reports. She said quietly, "Thank you." Ava looked at her, really looked, and saw something familiar. The hunger, the determination, the absolute certainty that the sky was where she belonged, regardless of what anyone else thought about it. "What's your name?" Ava asked. "Sarah, Sarah Chen. I'm working on my pilot certification, hoping to get into flight school next year." Ava nodded, understanding completely. "They're going to tell you it's too hard. That the standards are too high. That you don't have what it takes." Sarah's eyes widened. "How do you? Because they told me the same thing." Ava's voice was quiet but firm. "The difference is whether you believe them or believe yourself." She reached into her bag and pulled out something small wrapped in faded cloth. When she unwrapped it, Sarah saw a pair of aviator wings, not the standard issue kind. These were worn smooth by years of handling, their edges softened by time and touch. These belonged to someone who believed in the sky more than he believed in the people who said he didn't belong there, Ava said. He never lived to pin them on his uniform, but he earned them just the same. She held out the wings. "Take care of them. And when someone tells you that you can't fly, remember that the sky doesn't care about their opinions." Sarah's hands trembled as she accepted the wings. She looked up to say thank you, but Ava was already walking toward her truck, her silhouette disappearing into the gathering dusk. As the pickup's taillights faded into the distance, Sarah stood holding the wings and thinking about promises, about service, about the weight of carrying someone else's dreams until you could make them your own. Behind her, the bass settled into its evening rhythm, but something had changed. Not just because a legend had walked among them, but because she'd reminded them what they were all really doing there. Learning to fly wasn't about the aircraft or the technology or even the missions. It was about keeping faith with the people who'd flown before them and the people who would fly after them, and the endless human need to touch the sky despite all the voices saying it couldn't be done. In the distance, a training Apache lifted off for a night exercise, its rotors thumping steadily against the desert air. Sarah watched it climb toward the stars and felt something shift inside her chest. Purpose, direction, the absolute certainty that she belonged up there, regardless of what anyone else thought. The sky was waiting. It always had been. And now she knew that the only permission she needed was her own.